Welcome to Comfish Alaska 2022. Would like to thank our forum sponsors, Highmark Marine Fabrication and Northrim Bank. As you may know, this year we are doing our forums in a hybrid manner. At the end of the presentation, we will have a short Q&A session. For those of you online, please send in your questions via the Q&A box, and we will gather your questions along with those in the room. This presentation is Alaska Marine Debris, Information, Efforts, and Opportunities. Marine debris is an issue that is present across the global ocean and includes items large and small that cause a wide range of impacts to the ecosystem and the important subsistence and commercial activities it supports. Across Alaska, there is an active, dedicated, and collaborative marine debris community working to address and prevent marine debris impacts. Marine debris projects use diverse and innovative methods, but all have the common goal of understanding, removing, and preventing debris and the impacts it has on the environment. This can be through cleaning debris from shorelines, research to better understand debris presence and impacts, outreach to prevent more debris from entering the ocean, or responding to specific debris events. This talk provides an orientation to the unique aspects of the marine debris in Alaska, the innovative work being done by groups across the state to address it, and the look forward to opportunities and next steps. We have two presenters today. One is Peter Murphy, and the other is Andy Schroder. Peter Murphy serves as the NOAA Alaska Regional Coordinator for the Marine Debris Program. In 2009, Peter started the Marine Debris Program as the first Alaska Regional Coordinator. Since taking on this role, Peter has supported and participated in multiple field projects across the state of Alaska, including derelict vessel removals in the Pribilof Islands, sonar surveys in Southeast Alaska, and cleanups in many different parts of the state. Andy Schroder has dedicated his career to marine conservation. Originally from the Little Miami watershed of Ohio, he earned a BS from a Bachelor of Science from the Coast Guard Academy and served 2 tours in Kodiak. In 2006, he founded Island Trails Network and spearheaded a marine debris program that now claims about 17 projects, different cleanup efforts across Kodiak's archipelago. In 2019, he co-founded the Oceans Plastic Recovery Project to scale up marine debris removal efforts beyond Kodiak and to develop recycling pathways for ocean plastics. Thank you. And we'll turn it over to Peter first.
Great. Can you guys hear me okay?
We got you, Peter. Go ahead.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure I'm setting things up correctly. 2 years in, we're still figuring out Zoom. That's how it goes. So anyway, I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to speak with you. So I'm going to share my screen here. Now, are you seeing a full screen?
We will in just a moment here. We got a little bit of tech trouble. Stand by for just a quick second, Peter.
Okay. Are you guys seeing a full presentation?
Well, yeah, but not the right one. Just a second here. We'll have you on full on screen here in just a moment. Here
oh, I see. Sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
No, you're good. I just want to make sure I'm not messing up.
Oh, you're doing great. It's on our end.
Okay.
Okay. All right, Peter, we got you. Feel free. Go ahead, sir. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you. So first of all, thanks for the opportunity to talk with you today. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person. We're just getting emails now that say our ability to travel is going to start getting back to normal. So I'm excited to get back to Kodiak. One of my favorite spots. And I'm really glad Andy's there to speak with you as well. Andy has done amazing work in the Kodiak Archipelago and beyond with his group, both Island Trails and now Ocean Plastic Recovery Project. So if at any point you can't hear me, you need me to speak up, do anything different, let me know. I know hybrid formats are a little tricky, even though we've gotten used to them over the year, a couple of years now. But I want to make sure that as best as possible, we try to mitigate for those challenges. So let's see. First, there we go. So show you an outline of just what we're going to talk about. And I know there might be a slight time lag on the changes, so I'll try to make sure I give a little bit of space for that. But a little bit about marine debris overall as an issue, a little bit about marine debris program. So what we do, how we operate, what our goals are in the context of marine debris broadly. A little bit more about marine debris in Alaska, which for many folks who have been out on beaches, been out on the water, you guys probably know a lot of this already. So it may be review or things you already know, but you never know. So I figured include a little bit of background, and then highlight some existing projects, some recent events, so the Bering Strait debris event, which many of you may have read about in the news, and then kind of take a look more forward to what's next for marine debris, and should then hand it off to Andy. So first, when we say marine debris, what are we talking about? Well, there's a lot of things that come to mind, but broadly speaking, some notable types of marine debris are plastics. Obviously, plastic is really great for what it's intended for its intended uses, because it's malleable. It can do a lot of things. You can make plastic in a lot of different shapes, sizes, items, water bottles, glasses. I bet all of us have a significant amount of plastic items either within reach or on our bodies right now. So the challenge of when it gets in the ocean, that's challenging because the same things that make it good in everyday use make it problematic in the ocean. It lasts a long time. The most common form of marine debris that are non-biodegradable is plastic. There's estimates out there that over 8 million tons of plastic enter the ocean every year globally. And those can break into smaller and smaller pieces over time. Those are called microplastics. You may have seen there's been a significant amount of popular press coverage of microplastics, as well as academic research, but that making its way into popular press over the past few years. And those are defined as things smaller than 5 millimeters in size, although really a lot of that's much, much smaller than that. They come from multiple sources, microplastics, microbeads, things in cosmetics, although those are starting to be phased out, but also microfibers. So the fleece that's so good at keeping us warm also can release a lot of microfiber into the environment in different ways. And also pre-production pellets. So when you make a plastic item, oftentimes the feedstock for that they create in a chemical process are these pellets that you melt down. If those get in the environment, that can be microplastic. But then also it can be larger items that break down into smaller and smaller pieces over time. And those can be ingested by animals or have chemical impacts as well. They're still being investigated. Also, derelict fishing gear is certainly an important type of marine debris. That can be anything, whether it's commercial, recreational, or subsistence fishing gear that's lost, abandoned, or discarded, and enters the marine environment. And we recognize, fishing gear is expensive. Fishers aren't trying to lose gear. We recognize that. There are isolated incidents in the global kind of history of bad actors dumping gear, but we recognize that's not common. But gear can get lost. In storm events, other things that happen where your gear is snagged. Derelict crab pots, as you see at lower right, that's an image from Southeast Alaska. We know that can happen as well. So there are situations where gear is lost through completely understandable circumstances, but then once it's in the environment, continues to create impacts through entanglement or entrapment. So what can we do about it? What's being done? Well, we're going to talk about some specific examples of this, but broadly speaking, removal, going out and picking up what's in the ocean or on the shorelines is important. Also, I'm going to go a little bit out of order, but research. So learning more about where marine debris comes from and what impacts it has when it's out in the environment. That can be done through monitoring or lab studies or field studies. There's been work in the Kodiak archipelago there looking at the presence and impact of crab pots, for example, over time. And when you take those two together, removal, going out and picking up debris, and then also research, understanding what debris impacts you have, you can actually create a prevention message. So trying to change behaviors to get less debris in the ocean in the first place. And the realistic fact is we're not going to clean our way out of this problem in the long run. just doing removal without doing prevention is like trying to empty a bathtub with a faucet on. You're not going to make much headway. So we need to make sure that we're also preventing marine debris getting in the ocean. So a little bit about the marine debris program that I work for. So there's a lot of words on the slide, but in the interest of time, I'll try to focus it in. Basically, we're a relatively young program. We were established in 2006. Obviously, now we're coming up on 20 years, or just shy. But that's still relatively young by many standards. I guess we could, if we were a person, we could vote, but we couldn't buy a beer yet. But in terms of the context of the program, our goal is to try to address the marine debris issue. And while we have marine debris as our first job, so for many people, marine debris is their second, third, fourth job. They're a biologist, they're a resource manager, they're a fisher, they're whoever they may be. And marine debris is something they work on the side as a passion project or a topic of interest. For us, we get to have it be our first job. But we see our role as facilitating and supporting the marine debris community that exists, in my case, in Alaska, rather than trying to manage it. Or, it's not our job to be in charge of it, it's our job to help it. And we do that through removal, research, prevention, and also response, as I mentioned earlier, that we're going to talk about with Bering Strait event. We do that through grants. So a significant amount of funding we receive every year goes out the door to grantees, people who apply for competitive funding every year for removal, research, and prevention. So those grant opportunities, removal is every year and research and prevention alternate years. We're supported by Congress, so Save Our Seas 2.0 that Senator Sullivan was a prime driver of, but of course Murkowski and the recently departed Congressman Young were also key advocates for that Save Our Seas 2.0 Act, which include increased international engagement and the formation of a marine debris foundation. So just a little bit about marine debris in Alaska. For many of you, again, this may be a review from your direct personal experience, but the reality of marine debris quantities are high. While Alaska, of course, has more shoreline than the rest of the United States combined, even on a mile-by-mile basis, some of the highest debris concentrations we see globally have occurred in Alaska. And so that points to just how much debris can come to Alaska, both from near and far. And especially with Alaska's position relative to winds and currents in the North Pacific, we recognize and note that significant amounts of that debris is coming from the open ocean, from the North Pacific, or in some cases from other parts. So that leads to hotspots, because we have highly varied locations where you have debris that tends to aggregate on certain beaches. We've all been out on beaches. We can know that one place tends to get more logs or more debris than others, even a few hundred yards or a few miles over. And that's certainly true with debris. As I mentioned, too, sources, there's indirect and direct, meaning debris comes into the ocean both from local, like meaning something gets lost into the ocean directly, but also indirect, where something gets disposed of improperly on land and then washes out to sea. And so it's both that, but then also local and distant. So we recognize that local activities may create some debris, but especially in Alaska, the reality is that a lot of the debris that comes ashore, as I mentioned, is coming from further afield. And that's fundamentally different than it is in a lot of other places. And I think that changes the issue in Alaska. So in terms of the challenges that come with operations in Alaska, again, these are ones that you all will be familiar with, but access, many of these beaches where marine debris aggregates are far from developed areas. And so you have to get to them, as with many things, by boat or potentially by plane. Although, of course, for removal of that debris by boat is the primary method. And of course, that access is also seasonally dependent, which is, again, quite different than marine debris operations in the lower 48. And then, as mentioned earlier, for the access component being mostly by boat, disposal is also a challenge, because many communities in Alaska, their landfill or local disposal options and infrastructure was developed for the relatively modest needs of a smaller community. So they're not prepared, or in many cases allowed, to accept a huge influx of open ocean debris that could fill up a local landfill. And so that can mean disposal costs, even getting it back to a local community from a beach that's remote. Even at that point, many marine debris removal operations aren't done with disposal, because they have to figure out a way to get it to a facility that will accept it, which in some cases may be in the lower 48 via barge or transport. So this slide, in the interest of time, I'll kind of make it a little bit short, but basically the key thing I would just draw attention to is that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of sources for marine debris in Alaska are distant. And so you have marine debris coming from the North Pacific overall. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but the Kuroshio current, which becomes the North Pacific and then splits into the Alaska current, heading north and rotating counterclockwise to the Gulf of Alaska, and then splits down to California. That can bring a lot of open ocean debris, including even debris from the middle of the Pacific. And so that does mean that you're getting a lot of debris from far afield. And then the image at lower right shows storm tracks. These are historical storm tracks from many years ago, but they follow a general pattern of winter storms into the Gulf of Alaska that can drive that debris once it comes into the Gulf of Alaska onto shore. So taken together, that's why part of the reason why we can see such high debris concentrations on shorelines in the Gulf of Alaska region especially, but in Alaska in general. This slide is very busy. I will not read all of it, I promise. Mainly what I want to do with this is just point out that this is a sample of the marine debris community that exists in Alaska. As I mentioned in the introduction, there's a really active, innovative, and dedicated community of people who are working on this issue across the state. And we're really proud to be part of that community and to support it. But it really, I think the main point, if I was going to have a takeaway for this slide, it would just be that there's a lot of groups that work on this issue and do great work, and they're across the spectrum. NGOs and small business, federal agencies, state of Alaska, native and tribal organizations, academic, as well as industry and working groups. As I mentioned earlier, Andy sitting there in the room has been a part of this community for quite some time. And there are other groups that have been in the community for quite some time, but also there are others that are entering the space, working on the topic more recently, and that's exciting. It's great to have that combination of as many of us can attest in any organization or topic, having a combination of hard-earned knowledge, veterans who know what they're doing, as well as the energy of new folks, can be a really powerful combination when it comes together that way. So that's good news. So with that, I'm going to highlight just a few projects that have been recently ongoing. So you can see on the map at right, that just kind of shows color-coded with the blue and the purple and the red that match kind of the headers, but it shows where in Alaska projects are recent or ongoing. Andy will talk more about some of these, so I'll try to focus on just the ones in green that are different. But those are a project in Southeast Alaska, as well as a project in the North Slope. Actually, apologies, the color coding is incorrect. I'm going to talk about Bering Sea effort in the Pribilof Islands. So this project in the Southeast Alaska, it's led by State of Alaska Department of Fish and Game. It's in the Forester Island complex off the coast of Southeast Alaska, and includes crews deployed from Lowry Island on small boats for removal on Petrel and Forester Islands, but also on Lowry locally there, with the idea that debris will then be shipped via Ketchikan. So a tender from Alaska General Seafoods will help remove the debris once it's collected on shorelines, and then sent down to Ketchikan, and then they'll be sorting it all, and some of that debris will be sent to us to Lower 48, where Net Your Problem, which is a group that works, many of you may have heard of them, they're working a lot on net recycling, that they'll help facilitate recycling. And there also is a research component where samples are going to be sent for evaluation of microfouling or biofilm to see kind of what's happening at the chemical level. So this is an exciting project because of the combination of things, both who's doing it, State of Alaska being a great partner, as well as the combination of removal in an important and remote area, and pulling together a lot of different partners to make that happen, as well as the element of working on recycling, which, as you'll hear about later, has been something that has been at the forefront of work in Kodiak for quite some time. So I think this is an example of a removal project that I think we highlight because both, it's exciting in terms of what's getting done, but also the many different aspects of the work and the innovation and expertise that's being brought to bear. Also, another project is the Bering Sea Packing Ban Prevention Project. This is led by the Aleut community of St. Paul Island and the Pribilofs. And the goal is to change attitudes and behaviors for the use of packing bans. As many of you are aware, packing bans are often used for many things, both in commercial but also consumer industry. Those are heat sealed bans, usually around heavy items. But you can see these images. The one with the blue packing bans is from Southeast Alaska, while the one with the yellow is actually from St. Lawrence Island in the northern Bering Sea. So it really can show that these are items that are commonly found in shorelines, on shorelines and in debris across Alaska, and can be very challenging for the same reason that they're so good in their normal use, their intended use, holding back boxes together and not having any give, a very high tensile strength. That's a real problem if an animal gets caught in it. So this project is a collaboration with Trident Seafoods, the Native Village Corporation, and the local fishing fleet, where the idea is to kind of talk with people about how packing bans are used now and what alternatives there might be, or ways to change the way that they're used in order to make them less impactful when they're lost in the environment. Obviously, with COVID, the nature of this, the original idea was a lot of roundtable meetings. Those have been adapted, but they still have had a lot of positive outcome, and we're looking forward to seeing the outputs. So, for those of you who are paying attention or may have noticed it in the news, there had been discussion or conversation around the Bering Strait debris event that occurred in the summer of 2020, or beginning of the summer of 2020, extending into the fall. I just wanted to briefly take a few minutes to kind of touch on it for those who may be interested. As mentioned, this began in the summer of 2020 with unusual debris events, unusual debris being sighted across the Norton Sound and northern Bering Sea, Bering Strait region, which began with sightings on the St. Lawrence Island at Savunga and Gamble, as well as Nome in July of 2020, and then extended throughout the region. That's the image upper right. You can see kind of the extent with circles indicating areas with more debris sightings over the time period. And these debris types included a lot of common items. Beverage and liquid containers certainly are things we see on shorelines, as well as fishing related items, boots, bags, etc. But one of the things that were notable was the presence of other items that were unusual in these areas. People on the shoreline who know these beaches well and unfortunately know what is quote unquote normal debris were able to say, wait, this isn't usual. This isn't what we see. But also the relative freshness of the debris. You can see many of these items look like they could have come off of a shelf a few days before. We've all seen that debris that's weathered and brittle and looks old. This is not that. Additionally, the presence of fresh fruit and vegetables, which you can see this image kind of lower center right, indicates that a lot of this debris had not been in the water very long. So it's a unique event in that case. So in response to the concern and the request from the local community, an ad hoc response group was put together. So the local responding individuals and debris community from Alaska Sea Grant, COERIC, and Norton Sound Economic Development Corporation, as well as state and federal agencies, with the goal to build awareness of what was going on, try to share information, identify needs, and look for opportunities for actions. The reports that came in were almost entirely from the communities themselves, through Austin Amasuk at COERIC and Gay Sheffield with Alaska Sea Grant, who really helped facilitate a lot of the communication and all of these reports that were coming into the communities, and also raise the awareness of the local issue and the local concern. And taking that data, we were able to utilize modeling that's normally used for oil spill modeling to figure out where oil might go, and instead turn that backwards and try to figure out where the debris might have come from. So lower right, you can see these images of the possible source area over time from the original site location, pointing towards the Gulf of Anadyr, where debris may have come from in the weeks leading up to. So again, the idea is you take where the debris ended up and you look at the modeled or weather or measured currents and winds and see, okay, where might it have come from? But again, of course, these are very large source areas. So other efforts were to do debris analysis, so on-site cataloging primarily by Alaska Sea Grant, or entirely by Alaska Sea Grant, and photo documentation of initial observers. So the people were actually I should restate that, people actually were collecting the imagery and finding the debris, were taking pictures and documenting, but then they also were sending debris into Alaska Sea Grant, who was doing additional analysis and photography. So then, working together, we tried to analyze that to try to figure out composition and get a better sense of the overall composition by type, language, etc. So you can see kind of the type of debris by language here. Oh, sorry. And then the debris composition by type here. And this is all in a report that was requested by stakeholders and now has been put on the NOAA Marine Debris Program website. Another element of this was trying to engage internationally with the State Department, Coast Guard, and NOAA International Affairs to better understand where the debris may have come from, but also try to build awareness for future events so that we could hopefully coordinate better with counterparts in the Russian Federation. And this exists in the framework of, and I'm just going to briefly touch on this, that the Arctic Council has done a lot of work recently. There's been a lot more attention on the issue of marine litter, as it's known internationally. So there's a lot on this, but the short version is just that within the Arctic Council, there are 6 ongoing long-term working groups that exist and have broader portfolios. And marine debris has been highlighted as a topic within fully 4 of those. And there's ongoing projects. Right now, all Arctic Council effort is on hold, on hiatus, because of geopolitical events. So there's been an agreement to take a pause. However, I think it points to when those resume, the high interest in the issue of marine debris in the Arctic. And of course, Alaska is what makes the US an Arctic country. And so I think that really ties through very directly. So the last topic I'm going to touch on is the concept of action planning. And so when you take together all of these different things that are already ongoing and the interest in the issue, there's a lot of different efforts going on in the state of Alaska, and there's renewed interest in the idea of an action plan for the state of Alaska. So just as background, other states in the Pacific and nationwide have built action plans. So I used this map at upper right of the different fisheries management councils. But to show where those plans exist. So wherever you see these kind of hovering images, that shows where a plan exists. So we have coverage for the Pacific Islands, or at least much Pacific Islands for Hawaii, also for the West Coast, most of the East Coast. So Alaska historically hasn't had an action plan, but now there seems to be growing interest in putting one together, which is great. So the benefits of these plans is to put together the collaboration and communication of the existing community. And the idea is not to put together a plan that's prescriptive, but rather to capture a consensus on the gaps, needs, and priorities that exist and that people see for what should be done and what's already being done about marine debris. And so that's where we're headed in Alaska, and we're excited about it. So again, oftentimes these action plans can be organized in different ways. Some plans are organized by action type, like by removal, prevention, research. Others are organized by debris type. So as you can see, like the Gulf of Maine plan, they organize by like consumer debris and then fishing gear and other types. Same with the Mid-Atlantic plan, whereas the Hawaii plan is organized by the type of work that's being done. There's really no one right way to do it, but something that's common across all of them is that they try to capture what's already being done, and also across the marine debris community in a given region, but also what people in that community agree is a priority and what should be done in the future. And that's a key element of it, is to better understand, okay, what do we all think is important? So we see some really big opportunities for that, especially across Alaska, but especially with regards to the fishing industry and with other industries. But we can see having active insight and input from the industry perspective and providing feedback on elements, priorities, and actions for feasibilities and best approaches. Because sometimes it can be easy when there's people in a room to suggest actions for someone else to do. There's a natural human tendency, right, to do that. And so having everyone in the room when those things are being discussed can be really helpful to make sure that those are grounded in reality of what's possible and realistic, and also what's a good idea in terms of engagement from different groups. So that's something that we're really looking forward to over the coming months, is putting together this action plan approach and building in the engagement across the marine debris community. So with that, I know I'm a little bit over time, apologize, got a little excited about a few of the things there. So I'll just briefly touch on what's next. As I mentioned, action planning is a big element. We also are excited about new and emerging partners, as I mentioned, combining the veteran leadership and knowledge of people who've been working on the issue for a long time, but also new and emerging partners. And then we're looking for other elements of new technology and disposal, but also in things like UAS and other remote sensing techniques. So with that, I'll hand it over to Andy.
Time for the organizers. Do you want to? I know we have a break coming up.
Yeah, so I would just go ahead and do your 10 minutes.
Go for it. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Peter. Let Andy Schroder, sort of wear two hats in the marine debris field. The first one is really Island Trails Network, which is the organization I founded in 2006 that started it all for me and started the marine debris program in Kodiak. Next slide. This is really a trails organization. We develop, maintain, and maintain and promote trails in Kodiak, but since all our trails begin and end at the coast, and we're a coastal dwelling community of seafaring people, coastal stewardship and marine debris really made sense for us to get involved in. And so beginning right from the beginning in 2008, Island Trails Network started a marine debris program, which now has cleaned up over 200 tons of marine debris in the Kodiak archipelago. And I'll show you a little bit of where we work. This is a little bit of the composition. Like Peter said, I have only a few slides, but this one represents rigid plastics and really something that's on its way to microplastic size, right? Microplastic is 5 millimeters or smaller. We see something, we deal in macroplastics, but a lot of them are small. Doesn't mean they're really big. Marine debris is we like to say it's a time sensitive issue. The further that these polymers get broken down and compromised, the quicker the materials get difficult to recover and are more easily ingested into the food web. Next slide. Through Island Trails Network, we've tried to involve the fishing community in various ways. As you'll hear me say, derelict fishing gear comprises about half of the marine debris we recover in the Kodiak archipelago by tonnage. It's a huge component of marine debris locally, and we spent a lot of time picking it up. So here was an effort that we had some years ago, engaging with the Alaska fishing industry. Specifically, this was salmon set netters, providing incentives for them to clean up the coastlines around their area and deliver us the marine debris. And so here's a set netter in Uganic removing some packing bands. The results are pretty amazing. Once you start cleaning up the coastline, you realize how big a problem ocean plastics is. This is a barge that was headed down to Seattle in the years after the Japan tsunami. During those years, there was an influx of money available for cleanup. We scaled up our efforts and were able to find out what we really could accomplish when we were able to have significant funding and get people out there, maximize our capacity. So about 2/3 of this barge was filled from Kodiak area cleanups. You can see all the buoys, and you can see that even in this picture that fishing gear is a significant portion of it, all the buoys and floats down there, and the line is not visible. That's buried in the super sacks, but we're talking about a large quantity of stuff. And as Peter said, it's really part of the gyre. It's part of the ocean circulation, and we're seeing stuff oftentimes from overseas as well as locally. Next slide. Here's just an example of Island Trails Network's cleanups over the years. You can see a spike there during the years after the Japan tsunami when we had an influx of cash. But since that time, we've been trying to get back there, trying to find a way to raise funding and scale projects to the size we think they ought to be. I'm here to say, I love the NOAA Marine Debris Program, but it alone is not going to solve the problem. It does a great job building programs that has significant tonnage that comes out of the ocean. But as Peter said, the 8 million tons going in, there is not enough coming out. NOAA funded a cleanup. NOAA has funded Island Trails Network really going back to 2010, I believe, at least five projects that NOAA has funded. The most recent was in the Kodiak over the starting in 2019, continuing in 2020 and 2021. And you can see this is just the local Kodiak area. You're mostly familiar with these coastlines. The effort was largely in Afognak and Shuyak and Kodiak, and there are folks in this room that took part in those cleanups. Switgard, thank you. Really, over the past 15 years or so, we've cleaned up a whole lot of Fognac, and through aerial surveys and existing data, we're able to concentrate our efforts where they're needed most. Ensuring that we are hitting high target areas, but also staying away and preventing harassment and takings of marine mammals, staying away from critical habitat. But on the other hand, those are the animals that we want to help. So with that, we have started a new organization, relatively new, back in 2018, the Ocean Plastics Recovery Project, which I co-founded with Scott Farling, who is a chemical engineer out of Portland, Oregon. And the idea for OPR was to scale cleanups to the size that we think they ought to be, that we know they can be beyond the Kodiak Archipelago. ITN's program still is what does the cleanup here, but outside that jurisdiction, if you will, I'll pursue marine debris cleanups through Ocean Plastics Recovery Project. We have a little bit broader mission than Island Trails in that we are interested in collection, but also outreach, research, and education. The research component is mostly on is both on causes and impacts of ocean plastics, but also on recycling and recovery pathways, which is, as I, in my 15 plus years in this field, have discovered is a real bottleneck. There are gaps in knowledge, and we don't really know what to do with all this stuff once we do start recovering it. So we've set to work on that. Next slide. A lot of what we see, so you're looking at Katmai National Park, where Ocean Plastics Recovery Project is doing a cleanup right now, funded by the NOAA Marine Debris Program. So here is a sample of polyethylene. You can see it's part of a trawl net. Polyethylene is the most abundant polymer that we find. The most, as far as biplastics type, most of what we find is some variety of polyethylene, whether that's rigid or in a webbing or a line sort of format. And that kind of that rings true because polyethylene is the most abundant polymer in the world. Polystyrene is another big component of what we find. It's a pain in the butt because it gets very, very small. The longer it's out there, the further it breaks down, and it takes a long time to get this off the ground. If you get out there and capture the barrel size piece of polystyrene on your left, you save somebody a lot of trouble further on down the line and prevented a whole lot of ingestion. Research. So this slide really represents recycling recovery pathways that OPR is pursuing. You can see a trawl float here and a cross section of that trawl float. Through our partners at Western Washington University, this is one of several universities we partner with. We're researching the recyclability of this. What kind of as a waste stream, what can we do with ocean plastics? How can we restore it to circularity? Turns out quite a lot. A lot of high density polyethylene is in fine shape and it can be recycled. But until there's a process developed to clean it, particle reduction and so forth, it's really not going to be recycled. And currently, ocean plastics is somewhat radioactive. I use that in quotes. Recyclers don't want it. They don't know what to do with it. It's an unknown, undiscovered waste stream. And it's different than post-consumer. So Net Your Problem and folks that are recycling end-of-life nets, that's very close to our waste stream, but we haven't yet given the confidence to recyclers to go from end-of-life gear to ocean recovered gear. But we are working with Net Your Problem and Nicole to try to learn and share information as we try to advance the knowledge of recycling of this kind of material. So our OPR's current cleanup efforts are concentrated in Katmai National Park, which is closer to here than anywhere else. So we launch our expeditions, boat-based removal expeditions from Kodiak. They started last year and will continue into next year. These are also, it's also a floating lab and learning environment for the people taking part in the cleanups. And OPR likes to get people that are in a position to change makers out there, people from plastics industry, people from the recycling industry and academia so that we can kind of bring more stakeholders into the fight against ocean plastic pollution. Next slide. In Katmai last year, we got about 7 long tons of marine debris out of that park, and our goal is 50,000 pounds, which we think we're on track to accomplish, and we should complete that by the end of 2022. OPR also has outreach as a big component of our mission, and so we're trying to tell the story. It's no good to go out and put forth all this effort and spend these resources just to have more of it come hit the beach. And so our method of prevention is outreach, to try to tell the story of ocean plastics, to try to change the way people think about that material and use it. So we made a film, partnered with Max Romy, who now is a partner in the company of OPR and an employee, and our chief storyteller. Max's film went viral. Even it hasn't dropped on Vimeo yet, but it has made the film festival circuit. It's shown in 48 countries, 39 states, and 11 provinces and territories in Canada. So we're reaching new audiences with the story about marine debris. Maybe I've already saturated this audience. Most of you know me, but we are trying to reach new people, because all of us have a role to play. Next slide. The action plan Peter spoke about, we want to be a participant in that plan at OPR. You know, my feeling on this, having been doing this kind of work for 15 years, is that in Alaska, we have a unique ability to directly address ocean plastics as part of the problem. Marine debris is a broad term, and it can include all kinds of things, including derelict fishing gear removal, removal of creosote pilings. All these are important projects. I believe that ocean plastics pollution and its threat that it poses to the food web, and the potential impacts even on ecosystem services that combat climate change and providing carbon sinks. This is where the effort needs to go. And so I believe that in Alaska, we should have a continued and even an increased emphasis than to the national objective towards collection, and specifically to collection of ocean plastics, ocean recovered plastics. Prevention, the metrics, I'm sorry, if you want my full opinion on and what we're saying about what the priorities should be for the Marine Debris Action Plan in Alaska, this QR code will take you there, or you can find it on OPR's blog, which is on the next slide. So through Island Trails Network and Ocean Plastics Recovery Project, and with the help of Max Romy as our chief storyteller, and with significant help from the NOAA Marine Debris Program for both organizations over the years, we're working to have an impact in Kodiak, but to have that sort of resonate around the world and bring more people into this as we try to fight ocean plastics pollution. So with that, maybe I have time for questions, but thank you for your time.
This
She'll bring it to
is
you.
the question vehicle. So I'm going to give it to Mike.
All right, thank you. Andy, that barge you were showing with all the debris that you collected, was that how many miles of coastline, or was that a specific area over one summer, or just kind of getting a volume idea for the?
That barge was built, it was actually 2 barges welded together to serve all of Alaska, or at least the major cleanups that were going in Alaska around 2016. So there was a little bit of a backlog from the Kodiak, that emptied out the Kodiak yard that Island Trails Network has down the road. And cleanups that we were currently doing on a Fognac Island. Then the barge went to Kayak Island, where I had taken a Kodiak crew and was doing a helicopter-based cleanup, slinging bags off the beach right onto that barge. And so it was a bit of a milk run, aggregating all the plastics to take down to Seattle. So yeah, I think we claimed credit, our crews for about 2/3 of that. Maybe that's a little audacious. I don't think so though. We provided a lot of that, as did Gulf of Alaska Keeper, who did a significant cleanup on Montague Island in that year. So I think did that answer your question?
Yeah.
It came from Kodiak. It was a little bit of our backlog. It came from a Fognac, and then it went towards Seattle following the coast where it picked up the rest. But
If I could give my opinion, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter and Andy. Peter, nice to meet you again via Zoom. Teresa Peterson. I was wondering about the process for the Marine Debris Action Plan. Is that something that's initiated through the state of Alaska? Is something initiated through NOAA? I just see tremendous value in that, particularly when you show the magnitude of the work occurring throughout the state. It seems the more kind of cross-pollination and learning that the groups can do from each other, the better. But like, where do we start with the development of a Marine Debris Action Plan for Alaska?
I can take a stab at that. Can folks hear me okay?
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. So in terms of first, I appreciate that. I agree. I think it's a good thing, and I think it can really be valuable. I think as far as the who, realistically, in other states, NOAA has facilitated the process. And so I guess you could say we sort of start it, but we don't want to create a NOAA action plan. We want it to be something that the Alaska community the people who are working on the marine debris issue and been doing that for so many years, we want it to be a consensus product, and that's important for any region. So I guess we sort of are the facilitators or we try to catalyze it. But for a while, for historically, part of the reason we haven't had one done before is that there wasn't necessarily the interest from the community of doing one. And so we didn't want to create something that just was going to sit on a shelf. You don't want to do something for we didn't want to have a NOAA plan. So I think the process-wise, I think that we're in a really good moment to begin it, because I think Andy's enthusiasm, as well as others, to make this happen, and to do this in the near term, and that's where we're headed.
Thank you.
Actually, I have a question. The mic lady. I think it's interesting, the discussion of the fishing industry and the derelict gear. And I work for a big segment of the fishing industry here in Kodiak. I've really never seen any kind of vehicle to try to build partnerships within the different industry processors and all the different gear types. And I'm just wondering how that might be, what a way to try to build that conversation and get everybody to kind of work together for cleanup. I have examples. I know some of the trawl vessels I work for, they'll end up with a pot in their gear. And some of the corporate offices basically say, when you catch a pot, you must bring it back to town, while others throw them back in. So developing a system for where to, put them on the dock and how they'd be recycled or dealt with, and what kind of policies. That's just one example for my experience, but I could see there would be methods to do things efficiently and cost effectively.
Peter, can I take a stab at that one?
Please do.
So yeah, fishers should be involved in the planning process. When we do a marine debris action plan for Alaska, fishers should be involved in it. Fishers are potentially affected. They are affected by marine plastic pollution. They also contribute to it. And so I think that the right venues for this to be discussed are here at ComFish, council meetings, and this should be not done separately and away from fishers, but really should have them at the table during the planning process. How to involve the fishing industry is hard for me, and I'll give one example of an idea I had that didn't go anywhere. For one, we did try, involving a small sector of the salmon fishermen was good, and those are commercial fishers. but they're only a small portion of the entire Alaska fishing fleet. I had an idea some years ago to try to put some sort of ambassador, marine plastics ambassadors on salmon tenders or other vessels. You know, tenders are kind of interesting because they are very coastal as they go. A lot of them are fishing ground fish and trawl and fixed gear in the off season. And this would be a great set of eyes for us on the water to educate the fishing fleet, and also maybe to even do cleanups as they were able throughout the summer and just get people involved. That's really hard to do. You know, observers take resources, you know, you can liken it to a fisheries observer. That's a very difficult program to run, and there are insurance implications, and those people are mandated by law. Mine would be voluntary. So it's hard to get them onto boats. It's hard to catch fishermen at venues other than this, to, you know, in aggregate, to speak to them. I think the ways to potentially the ways to collaborate are, one of them has come up in across the city manager's desk, Mr. Twingy's desk, and that would be providing a way for fishermen to aggregate their gear and recycle it. You know, a place for that. Gibson Cove has been discussed, and I think we're signed our name to a letter saying, hey, we could aggregate gear here and get end of life nets into a recycling stream. Now, how does that impact how does that impact ocean plastics? If you provide a reasonable and cost-effective way to recycle it, potentially you end up with less in the ocean. I don't think, but I am not saying that anybody throws theirs in because because it's too expensive to dispose it. I'm not saying that. But if you aggregate materials, whether that's plastics that come out of the ocean with end of life gear, and provide a way to get that to a recycling market, that's what's being proposed. It helps our research, because if we can aggregate end of life gear, we can develop recycling solutions for ocean recovered gear. And so that's a way that would really be helpful. And in fact, at OPR, we're sort of dabbling in that recycling market, and I've bought a couple trawl nets just to see what we can do with them. I don't want to say bought. We offered a service to dispose of them so that we can study the material. So that kind of collaboration is helpful. I think also prevention is helpful. If we can find some way to prevent gear loss. I know that nobody's losing gear on purpose, but ways to further reduce what goes in there and prevent gear loss, knowing that it's environmental hazard, would be hugely helpful. So there are ways, but I think we just have to come together and find out what they are and put some resources behind it. Peter, anything to add to that?
I think you covered it really well. I think that there's a lot of layers. I think that at root, the only thing I would just note is I don't think it's anything you didn't say, but basically just reinforce. I think that working with industry, with the fishing industry, especially in Alaska, where it's such an important part of the economy and the culture, and not just fishing industry, but just fishers in general, I think it's going to be a critical part of the conversation, and to make it as optimally successful as possible. Because there can be hesitance, there can be kind of a, wait, are you saying that it's our fault? Tone to the conversation with fishing industry, and I think the honest answer is no. We recognize this is people's livelihoods. They're not losing nets. They're not improperly disposing of nets. This isn't like some sort of problem in that respect. It's at the primary level, but it's a matter of, okay, how do we work together on this? How do we share information? And I think as a person to ask the question, those sort of things of, okay, well, what are the common practices and what are the best practices? Is there a way to share information on, hey, we always snag our gear here, or this scenario where it's more common to lose gear, having be able to have those conversations in a more collaborative way, I think would be a really important part of making any sort of action plan as successful as it can be.
So I hate to say it, but we're going to have to move on to the next presentation. Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Very good information. And we can talk